Hi, I'm Mara Webster with Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. I'm so thrilled today to be joined by the fantastic team behind the latest movie, Lady of the Manor. We have Christian Long, who is a writer and director on the film, and Justin Long, who is a writer, director, and actor in the movie. And I wanted to start by talking about some of the influences with this movie because you've talked a little bit about how movies like Laurel and Hardy and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and a lot of those very classical kind of buddy movies were a real influence, for Judy Greer and Melanie Lynskey's characters within this film. And so when you were looking at a lot of those classical elements, what were some of the details that you wanted to pull into the way that you were telling the story, and particularly the comedic dynamic that you've created between the two of them?
What a great question. My God. Yeah.
Do you want to go first?
I think what we were looking at is just this structure. We were interested in crafting that, which is, as you mentioned, Laurel and Hardy and Planes, Train. What about Bob? The classic odd couple dynamic. And the thing that we love about those movies, because we watched a lot of them too before we started, was the clarity, I think, of that dynamic, like making sure it made everything kind of funnier too, to make
That's
this.
exactly what I was going to say.
Really?
I was going to, the word clarity is the key word, because in all of those great comedies, you know exactly who each of those two characters are. And once you know that, then the rest kind of fall. I mean, not necessarily, but it makes it much easier for things to fall in place when you know what the struggle is, because there's an inherent struggle in that odd couple dynamic. And so yeah, we learned so much from those movies, and not to say that, I mean, it's weird to talk about those movies while talking about our movie, because there's something inherently arrogant about it, but it inspired us, and it's just this is our attempt at trying to make a movie like that. Not to say we did make a movie like that, but this was our stab at it.
Yeah.
And then I also wanted to talk about the way that you're really melding different styles in terms of comedy, because when we look at Melanie Lynskey's character, it's kind of the classic funny woman. And obviously Judy Greer's character is coming from a much more classical space. And so you're really playing around with her being the straight woman in a lot of scenes. And the two play off of each other so well, but then they also start adopting some elements from each other as characters and comedically as the film progresses. And so when you were structuring out all of these two-handed scenes between them throughout, how did you think about the ways in which you really wanted these two different styles of comedy to play off of each other, and then where you wanted them to start to evolve into each other a little bit?
That's part of, that was definitely part of that classic odd couple structure for us. Was we wanted to see some change in both characters, and hopefully change for the better, like positive change. And so as you mentioned, with Judy Greer's character, she is, yes, the more classically straight woman. She was, in fact, so straight that she's from a totally different time. We thought that might help clarify the differences between the two characters. If somebody came from a totally different era, Christian and I had a neighbor growing up. She was just like a wonderful older lady who lived by herself, and so we'd have her over for dinner a lot. And she was she was very kind and warm, but she was also really into like etiquette, and manners. And she would often, not that my parents weren't, but like hers was a much more old-fashioned sense of it, like stand up straight, and like sit up straight and elbows off the table kind of thing. And so we tried to give Judy's character a little bit of that, just to show, how much things have changed, not with women specifically, but with culture, society in general, with people in general, just how things have.
And not to give anything away, but like you said, there needs to be some sort of evolution for both characters, where like, and what about Bob? Spoiler alert. By the end, Bill Murray seems more like the psychologist, and Richard Dreyfuss seems more like the crazy person. And so the roles become a little reversed, and same with this, like, we want this proper lady to loosen up a little bit, and we want this stoner slacker Melanie Lynskey character to kind of button up a little bit and be a little more responsible.
Get her
shit together. So it's a nice, they kind of like, and it helps see them come together when their personalities start melding a little bit, and they're not so odd by the end.
Yeah. And with Judy's character as well, with Lady Wadsworth, there's a very classical sense to a lot of the language, but there's still a lightness and an air to it. And then you've also really found a lot of the specific comedy that you can mine from that. Like the joke about how to her hearing the word dick is just a shortened version of the name Richard, and she doesn't know any other context for how that's being used colloquially. And so how did you really take that idea of classical language and then find the spaces where it would create almost this cultural difference between time periods and the spaces where you could mine for really specific comedy like that through language?
That's really well said. I think a lot of the comedy in that character came from Judy. I mean, I would say we were a little concerned on the page. It was because she was the straight woman. I think we wrote it in a way almost too straight. So there wasn't as much comedy like visible in the script, and Judy just brings all of that. I mean, whether it's through ad-libbing or just what her face can do. I mean, she has such a malleable, incredible, like, comedic face. But we, to get her voice specifically, the colloquialism, we read literature from that time.
There's a book that plays into the plot of the movie it's a Harriet Beecher Stowe book called An American Woman's Home, and it was a very popular book in the 1800s, and we just wanted to get a sense of the language, and it helped us write in her voice. But also there's a really funny line in it that says a woman in this era in the 1800s, a woman's place today is no longer just in the kitchen. She's needed throughout the house, in every room.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh my God, that's progress.
Well, and it was considered a very progressive book at the time. It was like it really made a splash, and that was another moment where it really struck us just how much things have changed, and how fun it would be to see people from those two different eras come together.
Yeah. And in working with your cast on the film, in the credit sequence, there are a few of kind of the outtakes and the improv moments that we see there. But it's really obvious, it's really clear when you watch the film that there's certain scenes where there's so much specific detail in terms of the language that it was, you can see the essence of the script and the way that it stayed really true to that. And then there's moments like, Melanie and Judy playing off facial expressions with each other, which obviously lends itself much more to improv. So going into the film and making it, did you have a sense already of where the spaces were where you really wanted to stay really true to the language that you'd crafted into the script, and those moments where you wanted to have more freedom and playfulness to find moments like that?
Really good question.
Yeah, I think that the only thing that we would have been at all specific and loyal to would be the language. We wouldn't want Judy's character to stray too far from the language of her era, just because it wouldn't feel very realistic if she did. But other than that, I think we weren't very precious when it came to the script itself. We were very open to improv, and
you can't be with somebody like Judy Greer. It'd be such a shame to have Judy Greer in your movie and inhibit her in any way.
It'd be a waste.
It'd be a waste to not allow her to improvise, because she really is one of the best I've ever seen. I've been around a lot of talented improv people, and she is. And as is Melanie. Melanie's very comfortable with it too. It's just, I think it was flattering to us because I think they both really embraced the script, and they wanted a lot of that, especially the scene where they set up basically the premise of the movie, like the deal that they make, where the lady says, "Okay, I'll leave you alone, and I won't be as annoying, basically, as long as you act more like me, you behave more like a lady." That scene was so important to us, and I think there were scenes like that where they really were consistent with the script, only because it was so rhythmic, and it depended so much on the specificity of the language. But otherwise, there were definitely moments. You mentioned them making faces at each other, and that's a moment that we always kind of imagined would be a little bit more loose. And you can't write, nor would we write specific faces, Judy.
Yeah, and because sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no.
I was going to say, and because they're both so truthful.
I was going to say that too.
Actresses, they occasionally there would be a line where they would say, this just doesn't feel right. And then every time they said that, it would be like, oh yeah, you're right. It doesn't feel right. This it's overwritten, or it's not totally in your voice. And so we got to a point where we trusted them more than we trusted ourselves as writers, because we were so close to the script that we really just trusted their opinion, and they were always right. Like,
well, and
if they had a problem with something, we're always right about
totally. And that's stuff that, like, for your listeners, if you're interested in making a movie, or this is something that you're on the path toward doing, I would say, I kind of wish we had done this, is just to have readings of it, to hear it out loud, get a group of people together, and because that's something that we might have learned in just doing a reading of it. But we didn't have the luxury of that. We didn't have the time,
or the friends,
or the printer to print out enough copies for everyone.
I also love that you're bringing up Melanie Lynskey's comedic style, because one of the things I always love about her as a performer is she can bring a moment that literally has you in tears laughing, and yet there's such an emotional vulnerability that she can bring into exactly the same moment. Totally. And like that moment where she's starting to sleep with Ryan Felipe's character, Tanner, and she's telling your character, Justin, oh, I think I'm seeing someone and I think it's really about to get serious. And it's really funny because it's so not true. And at the same time, you see the emotional vulnerability in a moment like that within her as a character. Totally. And so did you find that once you cast her, that it really actually opened up some of the spaces and the dynamics of scenes in that way?
Oh my,
so true. That specific scene was always, I always thought that was potentially a problem, because there's something so silly potentially about that character thinking that this guy who's like clearly a bad guy, not into her, is like, things are getting serious. There's something absurd on the face of it, but because she is so like earnest and grounded and like real in everything she does, it becomes like kind of sweet and like heartbreaking in a way that she like believes this about this guy. And she like brings so much, I know it's like beating a dead horse, but like she brings so much truth to moments. It's amazing.
But also like heart, like you said, there's such an innate likability to Melanie. She's such a sweet, I mean, you watch her with her husband, and her husband is the same, and their little daughter. I'm so in awe of them as a little family unit. They're just magical people. But so she was able to bring that just inherently to the performance, which wasn't really in the script, which is kind of our fault. She did a lot. The character does a lot of like, not terrible things, but like problematic things, and doesn't behave, is a little selfish and does things, but she is so just likable.
That you root for her because it's her. I mean, that,
right.
I mean,
that's Melanie. That's all Melanie.
Yeah,
I mean, truly.
And on the opposite end of likability, we obviously have Ryan Felipe's character, Tanner. And, what's interesting about the way that you've crafted him is he is a despicable character who's behaving in a lot of reprehensible ways. And at the same time, we also see that he is a product of his upbringing, and that's where a lot of his naivety and blinders come from. So you haven't written him to the stage where he's 100% villainous, and yet we also don't feel sympathetic for him at all as a character. And was that an intentional balance that you were trying to strike somewhere in the middle with him?
That's interesting. I don't think we were that deliberate about. I don't think that deliberate. I like that take on him, and I would agree with it. I just think, again, not to like shortchange the script or what we did with it, but I think Ryan brought so much of that to it. He was so committed in the way that Judy and Melanie were that had he played that for laughs, that character, and he been like less grounded, it would have appeared cartoonish, I think, and then unbelievable, just not as believable. But he brings a real truth to his work. He's a very truthful actor, and so there's something kind of like you said, like almost sympathetic about that he's a product of this affluent upbringing.
Yeah, and I agree, and also I would say, generally speaking, when we were casting it, we were lucky, but we were also very deliberate in finding people who weren't going to play the comedy of the comedy, because that's just what we happen to like. And we happen to like comedies that are played very real and like grounded. And all of those, everyone in it, really, including you, play like you don't play the comedy,
right.
And it to me, that makes it funnier when you just play it straight.
And we knew Ryan could do that. I mean, like nobody else when we saw him in MacGruber, because MacGruber is such an outlandish premise. I mean, it's such a heightened thing. And Will Forte's doing everyone's playing it so grounded, but Ryan's the straight man in that, and that Ryan has to be the real anchor for he's like the audience's point of view. He's got to be the one he's the stranger in the strange land. He's got to look at MacGruber and just like be stunned by his idiocy, you know. But he did that in such an authentic way, and he never tipped his hat, you know. Tipped his hand, tipped his hat,
tipped his hat. I don't think is right.
No, tipped his hand.
Yeah.
Is it tipped his hat? I don't know. He never.
His hand.
It's
showed
a
his hand.
He never showed his hand. That's it. Okay. Well, goodbye, everyone. Thanks for watching.
I also wanted to talk a little bit about the costume details, because that's another space in which you visually mine for some of the comedy as well. You know, if we look at Melanie Lynskey's character, she's wearing ever so slightly less versions of pajamas as it goes on.
Totally.
And, you know, there's details like her wearing a purple shirt with butterflies with a plaid shirt over it, you know, the tie-dye Love is Love shirt. And even when she's wearing the plaid shirt, you know, that's the same moment where Justin, your character, is also wearing a plaid shirt, and they're starting to find some commonality. So you're also using it to map the journeys within the characters. And so what are the ways in which you figured out a lot of those details with your costume designer?
It's so cool that you point that out. I'm so happy.
The simple answer is we had a very talented costume designer. We are not talented. We will never be talented costume designers.
I mean,
we had Fernando Rodriguez, who was the costume director on the Florida project. Very talented guy. That was all him, and it was us being like, oh, that's a good idea. That's like, we trust you. That's like really smart.
Yeah, and Vaughn, the whole costume department. Yeah. Christian had said earlier that like directing is just, I mean, you hear this, and I don't think I was prepared for how true this was. It's just like a series of having to make decisions. It's just like constant, like, yes to this, no to that, come back with this. It's constant. And whenever Fernando would present us with something, it was always like, oh yeah, that's like a different version of good.
I wouldn't have thought of that.
Right.
I'm glad you thought of it.
Oh, they were so.
You make it easy to say yes to that.
Yeah. If you, the Christian mentioned the Florida project. I remember when we got him. That was the only credit that I knew of his, and I was so excited to get to work with him because that movie just looked it felt so authentic. I mean, it felt like almost like a documentary. So I knew that like the acting Christian talked about, he was committed to like realism and make grounding these characters, even though she is wearing kind of like silly shirts sometimes, they still feel real.
The one thing I felt bad about is Judy had to wear that very uncomfortable dress, costume, the entire shoot. So that was very uncomfortable. She never complained. Mm-hmm. She was a great sport, but I found myself feeling very guilty that we had made the decision to put her in such an uncomfortable costume in Florida. We were shooting in Florida, which is not always the most comfortable temperature wise.
Our two leading ladies, we had a lot of guilt about we had guilt about her costume, and then we had guilt about Melanie's, because Melanie was breastfeeding at the time, and the obviously like she's like the cutest little daughter, and I felt so bad for the daughter. Of course, wanted to be around her, and they'd have to separate, you know, so Melanie could continue to work, and it was a low budget movie, so we had to kind of move, you know, and there wasn't the luxury of like time. It was difficult.
But she wasn't difficult.
She wasn't ever. I mean, she never complained, and I just felt it was a real sacrifice on her part. So we are so, God, are we grateful to both of them for doing this.
Yeah. And lastly, there's also a similar level of detail in terms of a lot of the production design elements. And again, there's the comedic things like the sign historian at work in your character's office, and then down to Wadsworth Manor, where you've really thought so specifically about all of the details on the wall, you know, from what that painting of Judy's character looks like. And then I think, Christian, there's even a picture of you on the wall at one point there as well. And so how did a lot of those details come together?
Oh my God, Sean! I mean, our
art department was so brilliant. The movie takes place in Savannah, and we ended up shooting it in Tampa and St. Petersburg, Florida, for Savannah, and which we were dubious about, but we were convinced that it would work, and it does. But we found the house itself is such an important part of the movie.
It's like a character in the movie.
And we found a house that looked really good from the outside. On the outside, the exterior, it looked appropriate, but the inside felt modern and like any
people were living there.
People were living there, yeah. So I was dubious again about that. And what they did in like a matter of days, like 3 days, they completely transformed this house.
It was so inventive.
I couldn't believe it. Yeah. I couldn't believe what they did. And it made makes us look good because it was like, oh, we directed this thing that look. But it's like the truth is it's all them. It's Alex and Kurt and Sean.
I'm starting to realize that like all we did was say like a few yeses and nos to things, and like all these really brilliant people supplied us with all this great stuff.
But yeah, the level of detail.
Yeah, they were incredible art department. Some of the best crews I've ever worked with too. And again, it was a low budget movie and it was in Tampa, and we didn't quite know what to expect, but it was just we got so lucky all across the board.
Well, I really enjoyed this movie, and so much of it is because of the level of detailing, like I said, you know, whether it's a costume element or whether it's the performances in the film.
Nice.
So congratulations on everything with the movie, and thank you so much for sharing all of this.
Oh my God, thank you.
So appreciate
I know your time and such great. Thank you for the insight into it.